So you've got all the hard work done to get threat intelligence into Azure Sentinel. Now, what do you do with it? Again, the primary use case for threat indicators in Azure Sentinel is to use it to generate security insights. And the way we do that in Azure Sentinel is through the area of the product called analytics. And so analytics is, think of it as your detection library. So we have these things called analytics rules. In this case, we have a set of 26 pre-built rules that ship with Sentinel that basically use different types of threat indicators. You can see the list up here: domains, email addresses, file hashes, IP addresses, or URLs. And each rule takes one of those types of indicators and it matches it with a particular type of event. So for example, you might see a rule that's listed here, which is taking domain indicators and matching them with your DNS events from your DNS logs. And so over the course of these 26 rules, we have a good amount of coverage for all of the different kinds of threat indicators and the majority of well-known log types that we have in Azure Sentinel. But of course, if you have custom logs, let's say you've imported something like your badge swipes from your actual facility, and that badge swipes has time of day and IP addresses, you can actually take any of these existing scheduled rules shipped within the product and easily modify them to just point to a different log type, for example. All you have to do is say which column in the log type contains the IP address in this case, and you're good to go.
Yep, and this is actually what I've done. I've customized some of your rules, and I'm going to show that a little bit later in the demo.
Great. So we've talked about importing threat intelligence, using that threat intelligence for generating analytics and incidents out of that. There's another use case, though, for threat intelligence in Azure Sentinel, a primary use case, and that is the enrichment use case. And so what that is really you've got an insight that's been generated in Azure Sentinel in the form of an incident. And whether that incident was generated because of threat intelligence, as we just talked about, or even if it was an insight generated from any other means, or an insight that was imported into your SIEM from another product, you can still use threat intelligence that is not directly imported in threat intelligence, into Sentinel, through the enrichment feature. And the way that works is, again, through Azure Logic Apps. And you can set these Logic Apps to run directly when the analytic runs, or again, after the fact. If you're investigating an incident, you can fire off any of these playbooks to bring in this kind of enrichment data after the fact. And so Recorded Future has a suite of enrichment playbooks and scenarios and activities with their Logic Apps connector to allow you to bring in the rich TI that Recorded Future provides, that contextual information from these data sets that are really absolutely huge and frankly too big to practically import into a SIEM. But you can still leverage them, and you leverage them through this enrichment use case.
Thank you so much, Jason, for mentioning that. And that takes me actually to the connector part. So as Jason was mentioning, we are able to perform multiple actions depending on what the workflow is. So for that purpose, we released a connector that happened in August this year. And this connector actually enables quite a large list of different actions focused on either different types of indicators for enrichment, either bringing the risk lists and for detection purposes. And really what it means right now is that we are going to bring Recorded Future Intelligence so we can help our customers in order to, perform threat detection, perform threat prevention, and also alert triage, but making sure that in that exercise, threat intelligence is not enhancing only the capabilities, but also the operational aspects themselves. So we are looking at saving time. We are looking at, responding quicker and also with a higher level of confidence. So overall, intelligence is being brought through the connector to actually enhance the security operations that are enabled inside the business. Once all of this data is being pulled by the connector, and it's going to be leveraged. We're going to show this a little bit later. Sentinel also provides some additional functionality that allows you to have a more overview over the operations and the security information that resides in Sentinel. And I will let Jason talk a little bit more in details about these workbooks.
Thanks, Adrian. I never let an opportunity go by in any of these kind of talks without giving a plug for our workbooks. They're kind of a feature in the product that is a little bit less discoverable, and so I want to make sure people are well aware of these. Azure Workbooks is the foundation of the dashboarding that happens in Azure Sentinel. And so the great thing about the workbooks that are provided is that we provide a template effectively with all sorts of different charts and graphs of information about the particular topic. In this case, this is the threat intelligence workbook, a couple of charts that we're looking at from the workbook. But you can edit any aspect of these workbooks very easily. So all of these charts are customizable. If you don't like the time series, you want to do a bar chart instead, or you want to do a pie chart, a couple clicks later, you can change it, you can save it. If you don't like the colors, you can change them, anything you want to do. You can take charts from one dashboard and mix it with another one. All of these are basically query-driven charts, and there's a very, very rich query language and charting capabilities. Think of this almost as like Power BI built right into Azure Sentinel. So it's a very powerful capability that I encourage everybody to explore. The Threat Intelligence Workbook not only shows you all of the telemetry about how much different intelligence you've imported and of what kind and of the different sources from where it's coming from, but it also gives you good information about the performance of that TI in the product. So you can see on the bottom right here, we've got a chart which talks about how many alerts we've generated per indicator. This is sortable, so you can see immediately the top indicators that have been hitting within your Azure Sentinel alerting framework. We've also got a chart that's not shown here that's in the workbook that talks about the different sources of TI that you've got and how they're performing. So it talks about basically if you've got threat intelligence from last week and you're getting alerts on that TI today, that's a good thing. That means you were protected a week ago by that threat intelligence. But if instead you import threat intelligence today and you're getting matches from your events from a week ago, that's not quite as good. That means you were exposed to a threat for an entire week before you were actually discovered it through your threat intelligence. And so we've got a chart that shows you at a glance each of the sources of TI and how well they're performing in that aspect.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jason. I would have to say that, you know, workbooks are one of my favorite things in Sentinel, and I had the pleasure of playing with them a little bit in the last period of time. And I actually realized that I can bring even newer use cases inside Sentinel. And we will see in the next part, which will be more practical. So I will jump to my Azure Sentinel instance. We will see how I actually replicated the recorded future threat views with global trending information inside the workbook. So they are indeed a very powerful tool inside Sentinel that I consider everyone should leverage. Cool. That being said, let's jump to a bit more practical what I'm planning for this part would be to show you a few use cases that I enabled using Recorded Future Threat Intelligence and Azure Sentinel. And the first one that I'm going to focus over will be around detection of threats. And of course, you know, triaging alerts coming from that detection, identifying what would be a proper incident to look into, and completing the cycle of, you know, doing the enrichment and bringing the relevant data for the analyst to investigate and decide what needs to be done further with that particular event. So thinking about detection, I wanted to focus on one type of use case, and I chose for that purpose detection of communication to active CNC IPs. In order to be able to enable such a use case and enable the business to detect communication of internal assets to known command and control systems, first of all, what I did was to import the relevant data set through the Recorded Future connector leveraged inside the logic apps to import the data STI indicators. And as you can see here, this is a very simple logic app, and you know, templates for this kind of logic apps are being provided. We're looking at importing every hour. This is how usually we update our data sets for IPs, and selecting from our connector the action of downloading a risk list and selecting the actively communicating CNC. Once this playbook is set to run automatically, this data set will be automatically imported and provided inside Sentinel as a list of TI indicator with context. Now, this connector, and I will not go into too many details, but this connector provides the capability of downloading multiple data sets, not only around IPs, but with other indicators like domains, URLs, hashes, and vulnerabilities that can be later on leveraged in Sentinel for enabling detection of threats. Now, once these indicators are being delivered inside Sentinel as TI indicators to the Microsoft Graph Security API, to enable detection based on these indicators, I have created an analytics rule. Actually, I have used one of the predefined analytics rule that I found from Microsoft, and I modified that to enable me to correlate the data set that I've just imported, which is the Recorded Future actively communicating CNC, against my NetScreen firewall logs. Of course, you can adapt these analytic rules to correlate our risk list and the intelligence that resides in Sentinel against any parts of the telemetry that you might be collecting in Sentinel that is relevant for that particular use case. Now, once this analytic rule has been set and different events are coming in, that started producing incidents. And here we have two examples of incidents that were produced by that rule based on different events that happened and correlation against our list. So let's think about, what an analyst would do in this case. So we have the content editors creating those analytics. They are running in real time. They're going to generate alerts and potential incidents out of that correlation. But if I'm an analyst and I will be looking at these alerts, how is threat intelligence enabling me as an analyst to become more efficient, right? So let's take each one of these events, right? So the first event is showing me that the entity that was found inside the event is communication to this particular IP, right? If I would just want to see a quick information about this IP, I can leverage at any point the new threat intelligence section from the threat management part of Azure Sentinel. And just by typing the IP that was involved in that event, I can immediately see that this is an IP that has 93 as a confidence level as provided by Recorded Future. If we would be looking at the other indicator that is being presented in the other event coming out of the same correlation, using this function, I can immediately see that this is a 98 confidence. So if we're thinking about the triage phase of different events and prioritizing different events in front of others, just by leveraging the threat intelligence section of the threat management part of Sentinel, I can immediately see what is the confidence score that was associated to that particular indicator, and I can draw some conclusions immediately. Which ones I should be prioritizing. Even more than that, if, for example, we want to go deeper and for the first for the first alert, I'm going to pivot to the event behind that, right? And if I'm going to look at the events, at the details of that event and pivoting here and expanding the context provided by Recorded Future, for example, I can see that this has been indeed referred and provided as an actively communicating CNC, but looking at the details, I can see that this is mainly known in relationship with a malware family called Emotet, and most of the communication related to that one, for example, is on TCP port 80. If we look deeper into the event, I can correlate that against the other parts of the telemetry, and I can see that the actual event that generated this alert was happening over a connection that is on port 443. So it's not really matching the observables that Recorded Future is providing. So this might not be, even if we're communicating to that IP, it might not be happening on a port that might be malicious or indicating risky communication. If we look at the second event and we pivot from here to the events and expanding the context and exporting the context of that particular event, we can immediately see in the details And of course, this is all information already imported through the risk list. So there is no additional external calls that are happening to access this context. I can immediately see that this is related to a malware family called Cobalt Strike, which I know that it's a tool that is being used, including by nation states and high-level threat actors for accessing in later stages of the attack. And I see the communication is happening on port 443. And if I look there, I can see actually that the firewall reported that this alert was against traffic that was happening on that port. So we have a higher confidence that, you know, this event is something that we should be investigating further. And out of these two, just by looking at the basic content provided by threat intelligence, I know that this is an event that I want to look farther into. Now, pivoting to the full details of this event, of course, I would be interested as an investigator. I already know that this is a potential incident. I want to look deeper, but I want to understand more context. And what the possibility that I have here is that for this event, I can run enrichment playbooks. And this is an option that we have here. If I click on this, I can see exactly a list of all the playbooks that I can run either manually or automatically to enrich this particular incident, right? So if I run this playbook of enrichment, what I will be doing is, and this is something that I've set up previously, I was interested in bringing from Recorded Future additional context that will allow me to get more understanding about the context in which such traffic might be happening. And leveraging the enrichment playbook, I can immediately and the analyst can immediately leverage the INSIC notes, so the finalized threat intelligence products and reports that are being written by the INSIC group from Recorded Future. And immediately we can see that this IP was actually part of a recent campaign that was involving APT41. So immediately, if I'm a company, for example, that I'm part of, you know, the industries that were targeted by this particular event and by this campaign, I can immediately bump up the priority of this event and start scoping the incident properly and see if I'm actually affected by this. And in the same exercise of enrichment, what I also did is I brought in from Recorded Future, I brought in the related IPs, and I also brought in the related domains. Now, what is very important is, first of all, and I'll just enable very quickly our browser plugin, because it works on top of Sentinel as well. And immediately I can see that all of these IPs are actually malicious just by overlapping the score here for the domains and IPs. But taking that aside, what is important is that if the analyst now considers that this is a threat that is relevant for the company by reading all the context and accessing all of this, they can start follow-up actions, which means, you know, taking all of these IPs and involving them in threat hunting exercises, or taking indicators that are related, dumping them as TI indicators for further real-time correlation rules that will be spawning any other new events. Now, if the analyst wants to obtain the full context about this indicator, he can easily pivot from here through the link that is provided in the enrichment directly to the intelligence card of Recorded Future, describing all the context around that indicator. And actually, so along with seeing, you know, all the evidence that we've already presented through the enrichment action in Sentinel, they can actually pivot to all the historical data that Recorded Future has ever collected from a wide variety of sources, right, around this indicator. So here we're talking about only events mentioning this indicator from a history of more than 5 years of collection that Recorded Future has. So as you can see, right, starting from importing threat intelligence, enabling detection through the analytics rules, and then, you know, leveraging intelligence for prioritization, triage, but also leveraging intelligence through the enrichment for additional investigations, allows companies to have a proper response against threats. This would be the first use case. In order to, you know, enhance even more the detection capabilities, through Recorded Future, you can also leverage the alerting capabilities of the platform together with the alerting capabilities in Sentinel. So going back to my analytics rules, I also have here an analytic rule that will be generating alerts whenever Recorded Future will be detecting a typo squat from the domain that are relevant for the business. So looking at the incidents here that were generated by this alert, I can immediately see that I have an incident that has aggregated 21 events. And just pivoting to those events, I can immediately see what are the actual domains that were detected as typo squatting from my domain. And also something that is very important, what is the context in which those domains were identified as typo squats? Because it's one thing, for example, to have someone mentioning a typo squat domain, and it's another thing to have an event or an alert that is mentioning that a certificate was registered for that typo squatting domain, because that indicates that the attacker is already stepping up in performing that attack, and it's already starting registering certificates that are relevant and associated to those typo squatting domains. So not only that you can leverage indicators, right, to enhance detection in Sentinel, but also leveraging Recorded Future alerts can enhance the detection capabilities of Azure Sentinel. Now, because, you know, we always try to move from a reactive phase to a proactive phase, and both of these use cases were, let's say, a bit more reactive because we're talking about detection based on threat intelligence and internal telemetry leveraged in Sentinel. The last use case that I wanted to share with you, and because, as I told earlier, I really enjoyed working with the workbooks, was replicating Recorded Future threat views in a workbook. I think most of you are familiar with the Recorded Future threat views, but just to give you a quick description, we're talking about dashboards that are presenting trending entities. So whenever Recorded Future is seeing, you know, a certain attacker trending in the landscape or a certain method trending in the landscape, like a particular malware, that information is provided to our customers. And that really helps security operations stay on top of their game and actually move into a more proactive state by following up what's trending in the industry and making sure they're adapting their defenses before that particular threat is going to impact them. So what I did was, based on some playbooks, I imported Recorded Future alerts, and then I used those alerts in a workbook that I customized myself. And honestly, it just took me probably 10 minutes to do all of this. Is very plug and play, and everything can be very easily leveraged, including the results of queries against data imported from the threat intelligence perspective. And what I've done here is I replicated 3 columns of the threat views, one of them being the trending attackers with the level of trend. And here I played a little bit with the colors, as Jason was saying, and I actually love that because it allowed me to replicate the threat views fully. We're talking here about methods like malware or attack vectors. And we are also talking here about vulnerabilities because, you know, it's a hot topic and everybody wants to understand if a certain vulnerability that is found in the infrastructure might be leveraged by the attackers. Now, what is important here is that at any point, if any of these indicators or any of these aspects that are trending are of interest for the analyst, they can easily pivot from here, from the workbook, to the full context of that particular threat or that particular vulnerability, and read the intel cards, which is presenting them, of course, you know, the risk information with all the evidence, and then all the writings from the INSIC notes, and of course, related entities and all the context that was found in co-occurrences. But again, this is an optional step. So all of this information that I'm sharing with you and I'm showing on the platform is something that Sentinel, together with the connector from Recorded Future, are capable of bringing inside Microsoft Azure So the analysts will be working with threat intelligence in an environment that they're used to. So that being said, that was those were the 3 use cases that I wanted to share with you.